Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Silicon Beach Mobile Startup. Today we're joined by Clarence Wooten, a Baltimore native, a current Google executive, and a startup legend. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you, Clarence. The context of our talk today is centered around his new book, CoFounder.ai. Now, I started to read the book probably a couple weeks ago, and I got busy and I got sidetracked. And I reread the book this week. And as I began to read the book, the level of excitement it built, the anticipation, and the actual connecting of the dots, having been around the investment business for 17 years, been around the VC space really since 2010 in terms of working with executives and other VCs, I saw something that really had not been presented in a way where it was tangible, where it was almost like if someone said, I need to go see a master cartographer, meaning a map maker. I need someone to tell me how to get from A to Z in the shortest period of time. This book was the ultimate guide, in my opinion, based on the fact of all of the trials and tribulations as an entrepreneur myself, and seeing with entrepreneurs and counseling entrepreneurs, and just understanding the level of persistence, the level of adaptability, the level of knowledge that you really need to have to be successful. And I think this opportunity that we have today, Clarence, is really focused on your spin on your past experience. And really, it's a platform for you to share your story and what makes it special for you.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I appreciate those words. It warms my heart because I certainly poured quite a bit of my own knowledge and perspectives into CoFounder.ai. And it took me a while to write a book, although I've been asked many times, why don't I write a book on how to build a startup or how to bootstrap a startup, or, you know, what's your process, considering I've been in this game for a long time. I didn't want to write another Me Too book. Mm-hmm. And in the 2010s, there was Lean Startup and other great books. And there's been several books on how to build a startup. But the opportunity became evident when ChatGPT had its moment, later followed by Google, Bard, now Gemini. And it was super clear to me when I started using AI, particularly generative AI, that it was the ultimate force multiplier. It was the ultimate bootstrapping tool for building a startup. It was the ultimate form of leverage for building a startup, usurping even venture capital as the ultimate form of leverage for building a startup. Right. And so then I decided, okay, now is the time for me to write a book on how to build a startup in the age of AI so that you can do 10 times more with 10 times less resources and get to product market fit before you have to raise a dime. Mm-hmm. And once you've done that, investors are chasing you, you're not chasing them. So that's kind of the backstory on what made me decide to write the book right now. Why now is that moment?
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you totally. In seeing how the book is laid out and looking at the glossary of terms and how you really explain that throughout the book and reiterate the key things that you should be focused on as you start this journey. And you did classify it as truly a journey. And I think there's a difference between being on a rocket ship and being on an airplane or being on a boat. The amount of force needed to leave the ground, if you will, and to break through the atmosphere is significant. And the impact that AI brings to that equation is, it's definitely, it's going to be remarkable for everyone. The other thing that I saw in your backstory, in terms of the things that you've done to give back to the community, and being a person of color in the venture space, and the advantages that may or may not exist from whatever background you have. Sometimes coming from a scrappy background means that you have a level of tenacity that other people don't have. You have a level of stick-to-itiveness that other people don't have. But obviously, graduating as summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins University, you have a level of intellect some people don't have.
Well,
So,
magna cum laude.
Magna cum
I'll
laude.
take the summa. I'll take the summa.
magna cum laude, I'm sorry, that's correct. So that being the level of achievement that you come out with in education, to me, is the great game changer for everyone. So I would like you to speak to what does education mean to you and for our community?
Yeah, that's a very, very, first of all, it's a great question. As I talk about in the book, I come from humble beginnings. I was born in inner city Baltimore, a community called Walbrook Junction. If you've ever watched The Wire, if you're old enough to have enjoyed that, you'll get a feel for that's kind of where Marlo is from.
Right.
And so literally, my first 12 years of existence I was brought up in, a red line zip code called Walbrook Junction, where, unfortunately, when you're from a depressed area like that, you're basically in the jungle. And when you're in the jungle, you got to act like an animal. Right. And it was the kind of environment where, as a young black kid, you have two choices. You can be prey or you can be a predator. Even I talk about this particular story because it will paint a picture of what it's like to grow up in that environment. Like when I was in elementary school, when the bell rang, I couldn't just go walking out the door. We had to look out of every window to see where the stick-up kids were, because you would walk out and next thing you know, your tennis shoes were gone, or your jacket was gone. And so being in that environment and then moving at the age of 12, 13, my parents found a way to move to the suburbs, which was a predominantly Jewish community, and rent a house there. And seeing the difference in terms of what middle-class life looked like when you were educated versus what it looked like growing up in Walbrook Junction in Baltimore. And so literally I had a number of Jewish friends. I would go to their houses. We seemed to be off school for every Jewish holiday. So I would go to their homes and start asking questions because mom didn't work. They had caterers coming over, swimming pool in the backyard. And for me, I thought life at that point was about being hard. But then when I started asking questions about, what does your dad do? And my dad owns a CPA firm. I realized that, you can't own a CPA firm without going to college and becoming a CPA. And there's a difference in business types. There's the small businesses that I knew, because my parents were both self-employed. They had to do that to avoid being underemployed. But then there's other types of businesses that are not really small, and they seem to have a different mindset, and they're packed by educated people. So to make a long story short, that's when the light bulb moment went off for me, probably around 13, 14, 15, that education was important. And at the time I had a passion for architecture. I thought I wanted to be an architect. And so, I had to straighten up and fly right and start paying attention to those books, which ultimately, between architecture and basketball, got me to college and through college. But I went the tech route versus the architecture route ultimately.
I read in your backstory that you did something with CAD design in terms of developing a startup out of that.
Yeah, when I was
what product?
Yeah. So when I was 19, I started off studying architecture in college, and got into computer-aided design. Of course, everybody was using AutoCAD back then. At the time, computer animation was just becoming a thing at the PC level. And Autodesk had come out with a product called 3D Studio. And I was able to scrape together enough money with a partner of mine to buy a copy of 3D Studio and literally taught myself computer animation and applied it to architecture. So we would do walk-through animations of a building. And this is the early 1990s. And so that became the idea. The genesis for my first company was called Envision Designs. I did a demo animation, submitted it to a magazine called Catalyst, and ended up winning first place in the undergraduate division of the Caddy Image Awards and got thousands of dollars worth of computer equipment. And then that led to me teaching computer animation at the community college, literally while I was a college student myself. And so that that's really my start to true entrepreneurship. That was the first company I had and the first lessons I learned.
Now, I noticed also that you began your college career at a community college before going to Johns Hopkins.
That's right.
And a lot of times, people have the perception that where you start will determine where you end.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, actually, I was supposed to play college basketball at a HBCU. I won't name the school.
Okay.
But they wouldn't let me study architecture and play basketball at the same time. They said it was too demanding.
Okay.
So at the last minute, when I couldn't convince them, they ended up giving away my scholarship to the kid they were recruiting behind me because they didn't think I was coming, because I was knee bent on studying architecture. So I lost that scholarship opportunity last minute. I had to go to a community college, and I was intending to be there just a semester. The coach at that community college saw me on campus because it was a local community college and convinced me to stay and play ball there for a year. And he said he'd help me go where I wanted to go. It ended up being 2 years. I got an associate's degree and then transferred to Johns Hopkins.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's kind of how that went down. Now, I just think, particularly in today's day and age, if you can go to a community college and save a lot of money and then transfer to the school of your dreams, particularly if you didn't have a great SAT score, the minute you prove that you're, an A student at the community college level, you can pretty much go anywhere you want to go. SAT is no longer a factor.
Yeah, I saw that as a hack while visiting or being at UCLA. My videographer, his daughter is a student at USC, and she's actually studying engineering. But I have a friend that I went to school with at Purdue. He's in the private equity side. He sent his son to LA. He's from DC. He sent his son to LA. He's from Chicago, but he lives in the DC area. He sent his son to LA. He was thinking about going to trade tech. He ended up going to Santa Monica College and transferring to USC.
Santa Monica College is a great way school to a lot of these schools. And they have some up in the Bay Area that will get you into Stanford. Yeah. Right? And so no, I think that's a great pathway. I have two daughters who have finished college. One's in med school now. But it would have been cheaper had they gone to...
Is it Jordan or Avery?
So Jordan and Avery are both daughters. Avery's in med school. She's a fourth year at UCSF. Wow. Doing phenomenal. She just finished her step 2. So she's basically a doctor now. And then Jordan's a data scientist in an AI startup. So they're both doing incredibly well. I'm glad you remembered their names. Yeah. That's right. Actually, I mentioned them in the book too.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a daughter. This is my daughter, Gabrielle.
Oh, nice.
It's a painting of her. Hopefully my daughter will attend either Pasadena City College or a program at UCLA. My daughter has special needs, but she's gifted in certain areas.
No question.
And we'll just see what path she chooses, but technology is something that she's been on. Technology and entertainment.
That's great. Apple don't fall far from the tree.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you talked about in terms of coming out of various environments, I think as a man of color, emotional intelligence is critical at different stages of your development. Can you speak to how you came to navigate that? Obviously, being within a large company like Google, I've worked at corporate environments like Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch. There's always a level of, do you show how smart you are? Do you say what you really feel? Yeah. Or do you time your assertion? Yeah. How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Well, first off, my superpower is I'm comfortable with people from all types and all backgrounds in any room. And I think that is a product of my upbringing. I mentioned that I started off in this community called Walbrook Junction in Baltimore, but literally I went to 8 different public schools growing up, back and forth from the city to the county, and learned that pretty much all people are the same pretty early on. Right. Whether I was living in a Jewish community, a Russian community, you name it. My social skills were way beyond my intellectual skills. Is the reason why they say that A students end up working for C students and C students end up running the world. Right. And so I think just having that background dealing with different people from different walks of life my entire life and being comfortable in those rooms really prepared me for landing at a place like Google X.
Right.
Now Google X, the culture there is a little bit different than the culture at Google, and I can't really speak to that because we're semi-secretive.
Right.
And so most of this interview has to stay focused on the CoFounder.ai and my other stuff outside of Google.
Right.
But nonetheless, because I was an entrepreneur the first 25 years of my career exclusively,
Right.
when I got to corporate, I didn't have anything to prove in my mind.
Right.
And so fortunately, I'm in a place and space that allows me to speak my mind.
Right.
And so I don't totally code switch.
Right.
And I think that's probably why I'm valued in a role that I'm valued in at the place that I'm at.
So you said a word, it's a buzzword that I see people use, code switch, but I would err towards the side of authenticity.
Yeah.
And authenticity is much more accepted once you've
Yes.
reached a level of achievement.
That's right.
And everyone realizes when you come in the room, he's obviously qualified.
Yeah.
He's obviously gifted in whatever areas, and he has value to bring.
Yes.
And I think from an entrepreneur standpoint, the success in the fundraising cycle, the success in the team building cycle is foundational on you being authentic and identifying people at their authentic level to either be a part of your startup or to advise your startup, because board of directors are key influencers in your progress. I think that as you build out whatever you're going to build, that there is authenticity is going to be just a reoccurring theme.
Yeah, I mean, I only know how to be me, and the advantage of being an entrepreneur for so long, you tend to build companies that are a reflection of you,
Right.
right? So you're not used to sort of bending to someone else's culture. You're used to creating the culture.
Right.
Now, when you go from that to big company the size of Google or Alphabet, you're dealing with another culture at that particular point, but you're still used to being you.
Right.
And so, I wasn't sure how long I would even last in a place like Google X.
Right.
Because, when I joined them, literally it was the first job that I hadn't created since I was 19.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I've worked for some large publicly traded companies, but that was because they acquired my company,
Right.
and I had to take on an executive role during an earnout period. But yeah, and it just so happens worked out, because of the culture there, is accepting of me being me.
How many years have you been there now?
It's almost 4, surprisingly, almost 4.
Okay.
But it's been great.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. Now, going back to the book CoFounder.ai, when you contemplated the structure of the book and the building out of the actual platform, CoFounder.ai, what is it built upon? The platform itself.
Yeah. So basically, so in the book, I talk about 5 phases of building a company. Conceptualize, launch, iterate, scale, and exit.
Right.
And each one of those phases, there's lots of workflows, lots of processes, workflows that entrepreneurs actually go through as they're going through each phase. And when you apply AI to those workflows, then now you get a force multiplier in how you can execute. And so it didn't make sense to put the AI in the book because AI is changing so rapidly.
Right.
So that's the reason why the book needed a companion platform that could aggregate these tools that help with each of those phases, workflows, agents, you name it. And so it's built on a number of different large language models and agentic AI frameworks and things like RAG, and without getting too technical. So a number of things went into the platform to make it possible.
Right. And I was very impressed, obviously, with the glossary as well as the AI primer at the back of the book. So in terms of the toolbox or the tool set that you've given someone to use as they build out whatever startup that they're considering, I think they're in a much better place with a higher probability of success. I wanted to look at what you would say from the previous startups that you had. Endeavor was Envision Design, Image Cafe, Progressly, and the venture fund.
Yeah.
What do you see as a commonality, or what did you take away from each one of those as you lily pad went from one to the other?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I talk about the process of entrepreneurship is a journey. It's not a destination.
Right.
And I haven't learned much when I was successful. I only learned when something didn't go right.
Right.
Because I didn't want to repeat that mistake.
Right.
And so our education system teaches us that failure is bad, but not as an entrepreneur. Failure is part of that's how you learn. Right. The key is to fail fast and fail cheap.
Right.
So you've ran by a couple of names of companies I've started, and I learned at least one or two valuable lessons from each one, which carried me to the next. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to get specific. You'd have to throw out a name. Envision Designs, that was the first company I started when I was in undergrad. Mm-hmm. I learned that it's very important to market to the right customer. Right. Not the customer you feel like is going to let you in the door. And as a 19-year-old kid, I was marketing my services to small architecture firms that I found in the yellow pages versus big real estate development firms that could afford to pay for computer animation. Right. So that was one of my first marketing lessons. With groupsite.com, which you didn't mention, right. At that time I learned that capital matters and location matters because I started that company in 2006 in the DC area, right. when all my competitors, Yammer, Jive, and other companies were forming in Silicon Valley. And during that era, you could not raise a venture round unless you were in a couple hours drive of your fund, particularly for early stage. Right. So all the VCs were on the West Coast, and all my competitors raised millions of dollars, and we couldn't raise as much in that ecosystem back then there.
And that was the one you raised capital in increments of 50,000?
Yes, literally. It was like $50,000 every month just to cover payroll, right. Which is not the way you want to do it. Right. Because either you're making money or you're raising it. And I was spending a lot of time raising it. Right. But the company became successful, but it became a lifestyle business when my competitors ultimately got escape velocity. Yammer ended up selling to Microsoft, and Jive Software went public, and Mark Andreessen funded Ning, and that did pretty well. And so that was a learning lesson. So every company I've learned something, usually multiple things. And so I think as long as you stay in the game, that knowledge base starts to build up, and eventually you get you put some points on the board. Right, right. Which happened with Progressly, and even prior to Progressly, imagecafe.com. That was the first big one for me.
Now, is it GroupSite that is renamed that is still in business? Or
yeah, GroupSite's still in business. It used to be called Collective X. Okay. And I'm the chairman now. I'm not even involved day to day anymore. Okay. Progressly was acquired by Box in 2018. Okay. Image Cafe was acquired by Network Solutions, who back then had a monopoly on domain names in 99. Right. And so, so the track record goes back pretty far.
Yeah, since 1998, correct?
Really, if you think about what I did in undergrad, since 1993. 1993. Okay. But in terms of true startups, I would say 1997, 98. Okay.
So looking at what you've done in the past and what you're on track to do right now, what do you see as you spoke in your book about one of the challenges that you had previously was fundraising. Mm-hmm. How do you adjust now with your new knowledge to make fundraising less challenging? As an entrepreneur, what would you recommend?
Well, okay, so I had become pretty good at raising angel money. Right. And the process of raising angel money is very different than the process of raising venture money. Right. Especially when now that's true in most places, but when you go to Silicon Valley, angels tend to act like VCs. Right. Outside of Silicon Valley, angels is a one-on-one relationship. Uh-huh. So what I would do today, if you need some capital to get off the ground, focus on angels. Don't focus on VC at all, because you don't need as much capital.
Right.
Leverage the CoFounder.ai platform to basically 10x your entire team, so that everybody can do 10 times more and get to product market fit faster. Actually, you can get to product market fit before you build using certain AI workflows and processes, which I talk about on the platform. Get the product market fit, and once you have product market fit, your numbers will start to go up and to the right. And also, don't build an MVP, build an MLP, a minimal lovable product. Right. The days of MVP is over. Right. It can't just be viable; it has to be lovable. Too much competition out there. So if you can do those things without raising venture capital, then eventually the venture capital is going to chase you, versus you chasing it. And so I believe AI has the potential to democratize the early stages of starting a company, because if it enables more entrepreneurs to bootstrap and get significantly further without having to raise capital, then it puts more people in the game, once you get the product market fit.
Right. I also saw that at this stage, most of the exits that startups experience are from M&A as opposed to an IPO.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about that? You have a great understanding of the M&A market.
Yeah. I mean, in the tech world, that's been the case for a very long time. Most entrepreneurs' dream is to build a big publicly traded company, a company where they start off like Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, and it turns into Microsoft or Facebook. But that's the rare case. Usually in your first rodeo, your first go round, you take a buyout offer. Facebook was offered $1 billion by Yahoo pretty early in the game, and they turned it down. And I guess it was good that they did, because we know where Yahoo is and where Facebook is today.
Valuation.
Yeah, for sure. But that's hard for a lot of entrepreneurs to do, because en route to building something that's potentially a publicly traded company, you're going to have multiple acquisition offers thrown at you. And and oftentimes when building a startup, it can feel like a tightrope between success and failure. Like one wrong move, you're out of the game. There's been lots of unicorn startups that went to zero, pretty much. And so, oftentimes it's hard to turn down those acquisition offers. But so, I like being acquired. One, you usually get all the cash up front, depending on the type of acquisition it is. And and quite frankly, if the company that's acquiring you is a publicly traded company, and they acquire you partially in stock, then
it's a kicker. It's a big kicker.
It could be a kicker, because if you know that your company is going to boost their growth once they acquire you, you just hold into the stock and make money that way. It's easier than the IPO process.
One of the things that you focused on in the book, even in the title, CoFounder.ai, the idea of choosing a founder or co-founder. What now, in retrospect, are 5 attributes that you would say make an ideal human co-founder?
You said 5 attributes. Okay, you put a number on it. I mean, look, I think the first thing is there's still no substitute for a great human co-founder. Even though AI is getting better and better and better, and you give up no equity, for an AI co-founder, but there's still no substitute, because the joy is in the journey when you're building these companies. And you got to appreciate every day, because even when you get to that mountaintop, it's on some levels it's no fun if the homies don't have none.
Okay. Let's reduce it to the top 3 attributes.
Yeah, I would say that first, you guys have to be aligned on vision. I think you also have to have complementary skill sets. Because you want someone who's going to, 1 + 1 should be able to equal 4. Versus 2. And in today's day and age, you need someone who's always learning, like yourself, learning new tools, new AI tools, because we all need to 10x themselves. So if every co-founder can do the work of 10, then you got 20 people when you really only got 2. And so AI can enable that.
Right.
So I would say that those are important traits, but also a level of integrity and trust.
I was going to say.
Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of divorces.
Right.
And it's easy to get married. It's easy to find a co-founder. It's hard to get divorced.
Right.
And so that part is really, really important. Because you got to realize that the pie is big enough. No one needs to be greedy. If you guys work together, you're going to turn this grape into a watermelon.
Right. I remember the concepts of the fruit and the different sizes of fruit that the company is hoping to achieve.
That's right.
But I recall you talked about the various types of agreements that you would put in place, almost like a prenup agreement, before you go into the startup with whatever co-founder you choose. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one, I think every scenario is different. Right. A lot of people think an idea is, because I have the idea, I got the business. Right. No, ideas are worth nothing. Execution is everything. Right. And so that's one of the things you got to watch out for. Right. Also, technology by itself is like having apples, but building a startup to a successful company is like baking an apple pie. Right. And so there's a whole lot of other things other than just the technology that's going to give those apples value. The ingredients, the skill set, the oven, the whole nine, that you might not come to the table with. And the other thing is, equity is not about the past, it's about the future. So when you give somebody equity, you're giving them equity that they earn over time. And so all co-founders need to vest from day one. Because one of the worst things that can happen in a business is you divide up the pie from day one, there's no vesting of that equity, and I'll explain what that means. And one of the founders leaves and walks away with 50%, 20% of the company, when that equity is about future work. Right. And so as a result, one of the easiest things you can do is make sure that every co-founder has an equity grant, but it's restricted. They get a little piece every month over 36 or 48 months.
That's the vesting schedule.
That's the vesting schedule.
36 to 48
36 to 48 months for the founders.
After the first, but the cliff where you don't get any until you spent the first year?
Well, the cliff is usually applicable for an employee.
Okay.
For co-founders who are starting from day one, all at the same time, they don't necessarily need a cliff unless you're adding a co-founder 6 months, a year later,
stage,
and you want to sort of just make sure this person's a good fit. Right. They could have some form of a cliff. It might not take a year, and so that is one of the most basic tools that every startup founding group needs, because very rarely do all co-founders, particularly when you have multiple, make it to the end, to the exit. Right. Along the way, somebody's going to drop out. And if they drop out, they shouldn't take, a third of the company with them. They should only take the piece of that they vested in over a 36 or 48 month period.
And you did say something key in the book about putting all your intellectual property within the company's name as opposed to in the names of the individual founders.
Anybody, pretty much have to do that. Right. Now there's some other stuff that I don't talk about, like QSBS stock, and if you actually built some technology before you start the company, there's certain things you might do differently there. But those are special situations that go beyond the scope of the book.
Now, when you say QSBS, what does that acronym mean?
Qualified Small Business Stock.
Okay.
And it's some tax advantages that you can get if you have, it's a long story. Okay. Too much to get into here, but Google it.
But so one of the things that I see as the opportunity, and you can expand if you want to, in this economy, over the last 20-something years, platforms have become the most valuable types of startups. Mm-hmm. Is your goal to make CoFounder.ai a platform?
Yeah, no question. No question about it. Now, am I looking at it like a startup company? Mm-hmm. Not really. I'm looking at it like an extension of the book. But the market will determine if it becomes a startup company, right? But in essence, it is a platform for aggregating the tools, workflows, prompts, AI agents that you need to take a startup from concept to liquidity.
Right. So when you say things like tools, workflows, prompts, I envision a dashboard. I envision a level of transparency at whatever stage a startup may be, And I think you had another startup that focused on traction, and that was the venture fund, right?
Yeah. So
Being able to have startups post whatever traction they have with their startup.
yeah. This was years ago now. This is probably 2014, 15, maybe a little later than that.
Right.
When it was clear to me that traction trumps everything when it came to fundraising, right? So if your numbers are going up and to the right, your discussions are really, really short with a VC. So it didn't matter what color you were, what background you were from. They see those numbers going up and to the right and they see real traction, they're going to write you a check.
Right.
And so that's what VentureFund.io was. It was basically a traction marketplace where you could connect your Stripe, your Mixpanel, your Google Analytics from your platform to VentureFund.io, the dashboard, and you would share it with angel investors and VCs. So, you didn't have to pitch investors, you let your data do the pitching. That way, when your app starts blowing up, money would start showing up.
Now, does that tool still exist?
It doesn't exist. It was something that I was working on simultaneously with working on something called Progressly, which took off.
Right.
And Progressly was ultimately acquired by Box, so I ended up channeling all my focus into Progressly at that time.
So when you look back at those attributes of that traction platform,
That's right.
is there IP that you filed patents for that you could take and say, I could use that and apply this to CoFounder.ai?
I hadn't thought about it that way, but I did file patents for the Traction API that we built back then.
Okay.
And I guess it would still be applicable in some ways to CoFounder.ai. But quite frankly, if you have a platform that's growing, people are going to find you.
Right.
Yeah. The focus is getting it growing without having to raise a bunch of capital to get there.
Right.
Because, other people have an unfair advantage when it comes to raising capital.
Right. I know exactly what you mean. So as we summarize what the impact of the book should be, what would you say if you were to make an assessment of what it should provide? It's
kind of twofold. I think, particularly as a minority entrepreneur, lots of us are familiar with small business owners. We got small business owners in our families, and I talk about this in the book. Like one of the things my dad told me at a very early age, Clarence always owned 51% of the business. Right. And that's true if you're thinking like a small business owner. It's not true if you're trying to build a big company. Jeff Bezos owns less than 10% of Amazon, but he's the second richest man in the world. Right. And he got there using leverage. And so it's a different mindset from a small business owner to a startup founder. And I think AI is going to enable a new category of business. Not a small business, not a high growth startup, something that I'm calling the scalable lifestyle business. Right. Where you can structure it and operate almost like a small business, but get to the level of scale that you would in a startup. I think Sam Altman said it best. We're entering an era where we're probably going to see a 1-person or a 10-person billion-dollar startup. Right. And I think we're there. I think we're pretty much here now. And if you can leverage tools like the platform, nothing would make me happier than to see a number of our users build 1-person or 10-person billion-dollar startups as we improve the workflows and agents and tools that we give you for each phase of building your company.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot to be said about, like you said, the entrepreneurial journey and your journey specifically. One of the things that I've experienced from being in the investment business, I had an opportunity in 2000 to make a cold call to Dave Stewart. And I just saw him on the cover of Black Enterprise magazine. And I drove from Chicago to St. Louis to take him to lunch. And he actually made the meeting, kept the meeting. At that time, he was doing $1 billion a year in revenue. And he was thinking of taking his internet version, telco, by public. We had a good conversation, a great lunch. I flew back the next time with the managing director of Morgan Stanley and another one of the chairman for the investment banking side at the time. And we discussed the possibility, and September 11th happened, so he never took any funds from them. But it was the idea, fast forward now, today he's a $17, $18 billion a year company. His net worth is what it is. But the value system the level of commitment to success, the professionalism, the things that I take away from him is his comportment, his transparency, his ability to communicate. And I think that is something that puts an entrepreneur in a way, in a place, in a position to succeed in ways that they can't even imagine. And when you were describing some of your startups, I wanted to ask, did some of them start out of coincidence or was everything intentional?
Well, everything was intentional to the aspect of I was solving a problem that I had.
Okay.
Literally. Right. Whether we're talking about VentureFund.io or Progressly or Image Cafe, they all were rooted in a problem that I had. And I've learned to sharpen my eye for what's Me Too and what's not Me Too.
Right.
Because Me Too's usually don't get funded.
Right.
So you need an idea that's somewhat novel, where the timing is right, and the execution is right, in order for it to make sense. Right. And so I've never really built a Me Too.
Right.
And I think that's important because a lot of entrepreneurs today go into the tech world and they're really building Me Too's, and they wonder, why did they go through an accelerator and come out and no one wrote them a check on pitch day? Because it's a Me Too. It was dead on arrival. And so, the things like that is what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know when you first enter this world and say, I want to go build a startup. And I hope to sort of put some of those, like I said, processes and workflows and frameworks into the CoFounder.ai platform, so if your company is fundable from day one. And the platform can tell you that, or at least give you a sense.
Well, Clarence, I appreciate you being gracious enough to join us today, to share about your book and to share about your journey. I look forward to your $1 billion exit.
I look forward to yours.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
All right.